The fire happened 15 years ago. It's been a long time since Frankie felt the burning of her skin and heard Mike screaming, but the days are still filled with the recurring memories of a flaming pub. Seeking a sense of relaxation in many different ways, the only time Frankie feels truly careless is when she's with her family. The group often visits the site of the fire and, every time, tries to let it go. It is the hardest for Frankie though. As her family laughs and sleeps at night, she sends text messages to a certain individual named June, the person she thinks is responsible for the fire. Frankie works as a nurse, so aiding people also helps. Not so much in the cases when the patient asks her about her skin, however. This exact thing happens when she meets with Florence, a young girl with bleak, exhausted eyes and a sad voice. As if all the energy has been sucked out of her system, she says that her condition is called a broken heart, a quite serious medical condition indeed. She's here after a failed attempt at stopping everything. In the next scene, as Florence is let go, Frankie eats a burger so passionately that she swallows her piercing balls. This is why she turns into a hedgehog until getting rid of the piercings completely. The next day, Florence appears in the hospital once more. Frankie's not into girls, but she approaches her with a bright smile on her face. Unfortunately, her expression doesn't really fit the nature of the girl's visit. She's here to see a psychologist for future prevention. Unusually enough, the nurse decides to wait for her. Her shift is over, but she still stands at the door, listening to the bits of heated conversation inside. Soon, Florence storms out with tears all over her face. It is clear that the session didn't go well, so she's definitely in need of some support. Thankfully enough, a certain bright-faced nurse is waiting for her in the corner, ready to give her a warm, accepting embrace. She's even ready to go for a drink. Resting on a meadow later that evening, the two are conversing about the variety of antidepressants they are taking when, suddenly, Frankie realizes that Florence is looking at her funny. Just a touch flirtatious, the young girl even gives the nurse a compliment. The next day, something very unexpected happens in Frankie's life. Walking in a mall together with her sister Leah, she suddenly catches a glimpse of June. The effect this sight has on the girls is immense. Feeling dizzy at first, the two start tailing her until they find out where she lives. It is at this point of the story that we find out more about June and why she's so important. Apart from her being responsible for the fire, she seems to be their father's new wife. No need to say that Frankie hates her father's guts. She wants them to pay. An immeasurable amount of rage and resentment forces her thoughts to turn black. All she needs is revenge, but thankfully, Leah is there to remind her that answers are much more important. The next morning, after a sleepless and anxious night, Frankie breaks up with her boyfriend Flynn. The boy is clearly not cut for her. He has nothing going on in his life, and furthermore, Frankie is not in love with him. This is why his speech doesn't work. The last hours have been bleak and hopeless, but later that afternoon, Frankie receives a message from Florence, and suddenly, an immense amount of weight is pulled up from her shoulders. A smile appears on her face, but the phone is snatched from her fingers in a blink of an eye. Leah and her boyfriend tease Frankie then. It is extremely uncomfortable for the girl. As if her secret is in danger, she runs after Leah and Jason like a schoolgirl who's been bullied. In the next scene, she keeps getting annoyed by the questions she's being asked about Florence. She and Leah are going to a music festival together, and Florence is coming too. The time at the festival is filled with music, dancing, and people with altered consciousness. As Leah gets lost, the duo relaxes in a meadow, and a thought appears in Florence's mind. She wants to stay at Frankie's house. In the next scene, all are eating together. This is probably not what Florence anticipated, but the entire house is one large chapter of trauma. The air is silent, dull, and heavy here. The only place that goes rogue in this realm of buried memories is Frankie's room. The air here feels different, so much so that the girls are being goofy with one another, teasing and having fun. Suddenly the distance between their faces becomes leaner and leaner. They kiss each other then, and this playful dance of lips goes on for a very long time. Unfortunately, however, their happiness in this land of stillness and resentment can't go on for long. Once they leave, the two start making out on the front lawn and are seen by Frankie's brother. The alarm goes off immediately, and an extremely embarrassing fight begins between the family and the couple. Frankie and Florence are shamed as spits of curses and insults are thrown at their faces. It is truly a terrible experience for both. The effect of this terrible conflict, however, wears off in a few hours. And when smiling becomes possible again, the two travel some distance to go to Florence's place. As it turns out, the girl is living with her younger brother Jack, and a woman named Alice, who is suffering from incurable cancer. Jack seems to have an autism spectrum disorder, and Alice seems to be a wonderful, caring woman. Having dinner with them is quite peaceful and satisfying. That night, Florence lets Frankie know that her mother kicked her and Jack out. The woman must have decided that taking care of Jack was difficult and unpleasing, so she took off that burden irresponsibly. Alice is an angel who took them in. She has been taking care of them for a very long time, but still, she drives Florence mad. Laying relaxed with Frankie, she feels open enough to say one more thing. She thinks that she's a terrible person. Well, Frankie clearly doesn't think so. In fact, she feels great with her. By her side, she's like a different person with a different past. Until now, she felt unworthy of love and care. Thanks to her appearance, she has always viewed herself as an individual whom nobody will ever truly like. But now she feels different. Sensing desire in Florence's eyes, she is beginning to love herself. Soon, Florence learns about the fires as well. It is a nice thing that they are swimming in fresh, cold water when that happens. After a long, convincing session that night, Frankie's hearing is shortened. She has a new style now, and Florence loves it. The next morning, Frankie gets to know Jack a little more. He seems to be working in Wikipedia, clearing up the mess created by thousands of editors. Nobody pays for his work, of course. After arriving at work, she learns bad news from her sister. As it turns out, Leah might never be able to have kids. Her boyfriend Jason has given her an STI. Immediately, Frankie starts putting together plans to slay the boy, but Leah stops her and tells her that she will take care of it herself. She seems to be a pushover. Just a tiny bit. After work, Frankie goes to Florence's again. Together with her family, she has some fun at an amusement park. Her mother calls and almost ruins it for her, but almost doesn't count. When the evening comes, Florence asks her to tell the story of the fire in more length. And so, the girl gets to recall how the pub got burned down. As it turns out, she was staying there in the place of Leah, who had gotten sick earlier and couldn't come. She was saved by a man named Mike. One important detail of this story is that June was her mother's best friend at the time. After the investigation, the police seem to have found out that the doors and windows of the pub were bolted from the outside and inside so that nobody could get in or out. Jane was arrested 6 weeks later, but Frankie's father never believed that she was responsible. Why would he? He was having quite a bit of fun with her in bed. Now he is playing happy family with her and acts as if Frankie doesn't even exist. In the next scene, the girls are on a bus. Jason, Leah's sex-addict boyfriend, and his group of friends insult and scare girls. Their despicableness goes over the bounds here, so much so that they even girls physically. The episode is so terrible that Florence tries to cork up the distress by drinking as much alcohol as possible at a club later that night. God knows what she takes apart from that as well. As Frankie asks her to stop and go home, she takes off her shirt and acts overly sexually with random men around the place. Seeing her dance makes poisonous demons dance in Frankie's belly. She wants it to stop as quickly as possible. Naturally, the girls fight about it afterward. When finally Frankie manages to get her out of the club, the two engage in their first heated fight. Frankie proves to be more dominant and aggressive here. She stops screeching at her only when the girl crouches down toward the blacktop and starts crying in tears. That resolves it all. What a great way to solve a conflict in a struggling relationship. Some dark mode is turned on inside Florence's organism once the two get home. The young girl wants to hurt when this mode is on, but thankfully, this time she is not alone. Waving Frankie away, she tries to attain privacy, but tonight, Frankie won't leave her for anything. She doesn't seem so good the next day at work, but when the night comes, she receives the news she's been waiting for 15 years. In an email somebody sent her, it is said that Jane finally confessed to creating that fire in the pub. Unusually enough, Florence doesn't care at all. In the next scene, Frankie returns home. Showing the message to her mother, she watches as the woman becomes something else. Meaning suddenly appears on her face as she tells Frankie to go get her sister. Leah is a little weird. She seems to have converted to Islam. In the next scene, all three are sitting in front of a lawyer, listening to his conclusion. As he says, the message isn't enough evidence to have any power in court. It's just an anonymous Facebook message saying that June confesses. The family is brought down after the meeting. Without realizing it, the lust for revenge is slowly suffocating them. By turning hate into their ally, they are digging their own graves. Speaking of hate, Florence seems to be in the same situation, only her hate is primarily directed toward her own self. In the next scene, she admits to conducting a very expensive cellulite reduction treatment last year. Now she is asking for money to do her nose too. Hating yourself seems to be quite an expensive business. Frankie works, and she doesn't pay rent, so she must have a lot to spare. Seeing no emotion on her face, Florence gathers that the Facebook message didn't get her anywhere. This is why she offers to deal with it without police or court. They will do it together, and all this pain will be gone. Being the best spy in the world, in the next scene, Frankie stands right up after her father comes out of his house along with his family. The old man looks straight at her but does nothing at all. His expressions remain unchanged. Watching the happy family go on about their business drives Frankie crazy. Clenching her jaw, thoughts of terrible violence roam inside her brain. She wants to ruin their happiness, and she wants to do it as quickly as possible. That day, the couple makes a Molotov cocktail, and Frankie gets to throw it at their window. The glass is broken, and the bottle ends up on the floor, but there is no explosion, no fire. After the shattering noise, a cozy silence starts ruling the neighborhood, until suddenly, the couple sees June's son, holding the burning bottle in his hands. He is looking straight at them as the clutch keeps blazing. He continues to hold it in his hands until June comes running toward him and throws the cocktail outside. This is when the fire starts. The girls are nowhere to be found by then. There is an immeasurable amount of guilt and fear on Frankie's face in the following scene, but Florence is clearly excited to do it again. The resentment she's been feeling towards the guys who abused her on the bus seems to have found a way to be expressed through this explosive activity. Dreams start coming to Frankie afterward. Terrible dreams full of images of little children in front of a blazing bonfire. The next morning she wants to talk about it with Florence, but the young girl is acting unusually. She is indifferent, distant, rude, and aggressive toward both Frankie and Alice. Leaving the two, she goes upstairs, gets dressed, and leaves the house to go have some fun. Alice is clearly exhausted from all this. The kind smile seemed to have been a mask she got used to wearing. In truth, she is a woman of many griefs. Taking care of Jack and Florence is as difficult as running away from a bear while there's a cliff in front, wolves on the right, and fire on the left. She is alone, burdened, and desperate. She is doing everything she can, but nothing seems to work. After spending one full day with Frankie, however, she starts laughing like a duck. There seems to be an immeasurable kindness inside her heart. The two are giggling together when Florence finally comes back from a club. Seeing the two having fun, she apologizes to Alice, but fills that apology with an unusual, artificial tone. Then she does something even more unexpected. Turning towards Frankie, she keeps conversing with Alice, asking her to get rid of this bacteria in a person. She wants Frankie out of her apartment as soon as possible. She is so possessive that she can no longer breathe, and she is breaking the family apart. Furthermore, she just doesn't like her anymore. At first, this is what she keeps telling Frankie when the girl tries to understand what is going on. But soon, her evil becomes even worse. Diving headfirst into an ocean of rage and bitterness, she starts stomping on her trauma. Knowing about her vulnerable parts, she aims to push down on them as hard as possible to elicit as much pain as she can bear. Understandably enough, Frankie doesn't act as an angel at this moment. This is Alice's house, so she won't leave until she says so. In the next scene, she is asking one of her patients about his pain. He rates it as 5. Cute. She passed over 1 million long ago. To add to everything, Alice's cancer gets worse. There is nothing they can do to stop it. One day, Leah comes for a visit. Covering up her body, she wants to be a full-fledged Muslim. Frankie is accepting of her conversion, of course, but she just can't wrap her mind around the fact that her sister wants to do that. She has been covering up her entire body throughout her entire life because she felt embarrassed of herself. She thought her skin was despicable and disgusting. Can it be that Leah feels the same way? Whatever it is, she seems to be quite engaged in Islam now. This is why the news she brings feels extremely unexpected. As she suddenly declared to Frankie, she stabbed Jason and left him on the ground. For all she knows, he might be deceased now. Not wanting to discuss it in length, the girl shows an unusual lack of care towards this matter, but only God knows what is happening inside her mind. Later that night, Alice spends some time with the sisters, discussing religion, demise, and Tinder while drinking and smoking. They make a cheerful lot. The days that come are quite warm and joyful. With Jack and Alice, Frankie has found a new family. The deep-seated anger and rage that hasn't been dealt with, however, still roams inside the depths of her mind. One day, Alice prepares to have a date. Naturally, Jack and Frankie are both there to support her, but unfortunately, the date is not going to happen. When the man arrives and sees Alice from afar, he just turns away and leaves. This is when Frankie's rage explodes out of her. Running after the man, she not only shames and embarrasses him, but also tries to physically. It helps her rage a lot, but it doesn't help Alice at all. The latter is extremely disappointed in her, but it is nothing she can't laugh about. Leah is smoking a cigarette in the next scene. She is getting a hang of Islam pretty slowly, as it seems. When she meets her sister in this scene, she breaks good news to her. As it turns out, she has a new boyfriend. He's a Muslim as well, and they are praying together for a baby. We all know what Frankie thinks about it, but her sister's cheerfulness forces her to join in with the happiness. Perhaps this is why she doesn't care at all when Flynn passes them by, walking with his new girlfriend. This cheerfulness, however, quickly fades away later that day. Upon getting back home, her mother tells her about an accidental meeting she had with Jane. After running into her, Jane seems to have shown her a picture of a man, proving that he was the one starting the fire. A fight ensued, as the mother says, and it was all recorded. Frankie is watching this recording when suddenly something horrible happens in the present time. Police are at the door, and they are arresting Leah for assaulting Jason. After all is done and justice is brought upon the young girl, Frankie starts wondering about the unfairness of it all. Justice comes for some people, while for others, it lingers for eternity. 15 years have passed, and June is still out there, while Leah is put to jail in a few hours. Perhaps it is only tunnel vision though. As Jack says in the next scene, he has read a lot about that fire on Wikipedia, and he found traces of many pieces of evidence that the fire could have been caused by many different reasons. Naturally, this is the last thing Frankie wants to hear. As Alice's condition gets worse, the darkness in her mind starts spreading rapidly. Perhaps it is Alice's condition that forces her to seek out Florence. Their reunion is quick and ordinary. No special feeling is shown on the outside, and the relationship is resumed as if nothing has even happened. Shortly after, Frankie tells her to come back home. Alice is really unwell, and this time, it is definitely final. Florence acts coldly towards this matter. She has been waiting for her demise for a very long time. She has grieved her, and she no longer wants to be immersed in that kind of life. She is okay now. She has found a passion of hers in cinema, and has gotten to know a director that really speaks to her. At this moment, Florence even goes as far as saying that the director is a genius who gave her life meaning. When we see his work, however, we see that he's very far from being a genius. During the premiere, Frankie watches the film. It feels like the flames of boredom are burning her skin all over again. When it's done, she claps and leaves immediately, so naturally, Florence is not happy about that. To get back to her, she avoids her at the after-party and flirts with another man to make her jealous. Frankie is finally fed up. Approaching her during one of her flirting sessions, she demands a reason for her behavior, but instead receives a drink in her face. Getting away from her, she walks back to her house, where a person filled with kindness is waiting for her. Even though the end is near, Alice somehow still manages to present nothing but warmth and joy. She truly is a remarkable person. To make her feel better, Frankie promises her that she will take care of Jack when she's gone, and receives the best advice in return. At this moment, Alice engraves words of wisdom and kindness in her mind. She must let go of the ball of anger that is holding her back to live a fulfilling and joyful life. Who knows, she might even be able to forgive then. The next day, after taking Jack to an amusement park, Frankie makes dinner and eats it with the young man. She goes over to Alice to see how she's doing and realizes that she is gone. When Jack finds out about this, he almost loses control over his emotions and behavior. But thankfully, Frankie manages to calm him down. The world is truly less bright now, with Alice gone. Florence and Frankie meet each other again during Alice's funeral. In the light of this gigantic event, their relationship problems seem small and unmeaningful. Now that their kind support is gone, all they have left is each other. Florence misses Frankie so much. Soon, Leah starts doing community service. She and Frankie are traveling through the country when suddenly she starts talking about the fire. It was her who was supposed to be there and not Frankie. This fire has ruined the girl's life, but as she says in this moment, she is thankful that it was her and not Leah. Leah might have not survived. This conversation marks a sharp shift in Frankie's way of thinking. It is clear that she is taking Alice's last advice and using it in real life. Soon, as she and Leah visit Jack in his new home, a new meaning appears in Frankie's eyes. Now that the rage in her heart burns low, she finds herself laughing and smiling in a genuine way. Even more, she soon finds herself in front of her father's house, knocking on the door. The man recognizes her immediately, and so does her stepbrother. The little man is eager to let her in. He seems to be a warm, kind-hearted boy who's been raised in a unified, loving family.